Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts, I welcome you all for this physical as well as virtual. In fact, it is a discussion on Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, and we are commemorating the 125th birth anniversary. And I have really a great pleasure that in this program we are collaborating with the Austrian Cultural Forum. We have with us the head of mission of Austrian Embassy with us, and we also have with us Dr. Sachidanand Joshi. He is the member secretary of the IGNCA and the mentor for organizing this program. He helped us a lot. We also have with us in the physical panel Mrs. Renuka Malekarji. She's the grand niece of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, and in herself she's an educationist, and she will be throwing light on Netaji's how we can in help, how we can change, or how we can in our education system we can give more emphasis on Netaji's contribution. We have with us Mr. who is the senior advisor of the Austrian Embassy. And in the panel, in the online panel, we have with us Dr. Anita Bosch Paf, daughter of Netaji. She's also an eminent economist of Germany. We have with us Dr. Anton Palinka, eminent political scientist from Austria. We have with us Dr. Pushpesh Pant. In fact, everyone, we all know him very well. Professor Emeritus, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is a filmmaker, columnist, and historian. We also have with us, in fact, it's an honor to have with us Mrs. Bharati Asha Chaudhary ji. She was lieutenant of Rani Jhansi Brigade, and she's joined with Mr. Sanjay Chaudhary, who is the General Secretary of Netaji Subhash Bose INA Trust. So I welcome you to this really very important collaboration between Austria and India. And I will now request Dr. Sachidanand Joshi, Member Secretary, IGNCA, to welcome all of us, give a welcome address, and throw and speak something on the piece.
Thank you, Dr. Achal Pandya, and very good afternoon to everyone here present here and people who have joined us on the virtual platform. On behalf of IGNCA and the Austrian Embassy and Austrian Cultural Forum, I welcome all the dignitaries to discuss about various aspects of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. As we all know that the entire world is celebrating the 125 years of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And it is pertinent to discuss the various facets of Netaji's personality. We all know that he was a visionary. He dreamt about the future of India, and he was a true global leader in the modern established not only India's point of view to the entire world, but also tried to promote uh, the uh, the gallantry of Indian soldiers to the entire world. Not only promote, but it was kind of an enthusiasm which Honorable Netaji generated among the people. So it would be pertinent to discuss all these aspects of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, uh, especially for the younger generation who do not know much about Netaji and who could not read much about Netaji. Uh, this year we are planning to uh, take the message of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose to different institutions and especially to the youngsters, because he was a kind of person who always sort of generated energy among the youths, and he was the person who also sort of brought some kind of an self-esteem among the Indian people even during the freedom struggle. As we know that his personality was such that he was selected for the civil services in 1920. But after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Netaji resigned from the civil services. The person who had the dedication for the country could dare to resign from the civil services, and very politely he told that I would not like to continue as civil servant. And then he joined the Congress and he joined the movement. He was also jailed in civil disobedience movement. And when he came in contact with Mahatma Gandhi, he was a follower of Mahatma Gandhi, and he also tried to follow all the programs of Indian National Congress. He is the person who was president of Indian National Congress twice in his career. That is a kind of an achievement which is a very rare achievement. In 1937 in Haripura Congress, Netaji was elected as the president. And in 1939, he was again elected as president in Tripuri Congress. Coincidentally, in Tripuri Congress, there was another official candidate by the Congress, that was Pattabhi Ramaiah. But Netaji defeated Pattabhi Ramaiah with a huge margin, not only small margin, with a huge margin. And that was an example of his popularity among the leaders who were guiding the freedom movement. I was just reading from the references of Netaji of Tripuri Congress, and I came to know that he was running 104-degree fever when he went to Tripuri Congress. And he could not physically be present during the voting because he was running heavy fever at that time. And still Netaji won that election. And a procession was planned on 51 elephants to celebrate the victory of Netaji. But impressed them with his vision and mission, and he could gain support from all of them. And we know that in 1944, 45 kind of wars which Azad Hind Fauj was fighting, really remarkable of Indian history. But an untimely and sad demise of Netaji actually virtually closed that chapter of Indian history, which we all should have known. Uh, Even after the independence, I don't think enough justice has been made to the vision and the mission of Netaji. Enough awareness was not generated about the works which Netaji has carried out. In fact, a person who had all kinds of quality to become a global leader uh, was lost, untimely loss, I think. And the Netaji's death was not only the loss to India, but it was a loss to the entire world. He was, that is, in that sense, he was a true global leader. So I think all these aspects should have been told to the younger generation so that they know about their leaders and their capabilities and how they have dealt with the difficult situations. We even in recently also we could see that some files of Netaji were brought to the public domain, and even research are going on, whatever he has written in his documents, and those things needs to be researched only for the sake of knowledge and only for the sake of understanding the persona in a much better sense. We are fortunate to have people on this panel uh, who belong to Netaji's family. His daughter, Dr. Neta Bose Paf, she has joined virtually, and we welcome her. In fact, we would have been happy if we could have her here personally, but because of this pandemic situation, we know that traveling has become little difficult. But we welcome Anita ji, and it is really our pleasure that you are here to bless us on this occasion. We are also fortunate to have Dr. Anton Pelinka, who is an eminent political scientist from Austria, and we would be fortunate to listen to his visionary ideas. Of course, Renuka Malakarji, sitting right next to me, has been very helpful. We have organized a couple of programs during this commemoration, and she has always been a great support and great help, and she is doing a great job as far as the Indian National Army's different conservation part and aspects are concerned. So I welcome her. We also welcome Bharti Asha Chaudhary ji, who was a lieutenant in Rani Jhansi Brigade of Indian National Army. We know that Netaji's vision was such that he created a separate brigade for the women, just to establish. And you can really understand the vision. In 1942-43, a person thinks of a completely female brigade in the Indian National Army. And two other brigades were, I think, Nehru and Gandhi Brigade and Nehru Brigade. So people who always think that Netaji had some kind of a differences with Gandhiji, and that is why there was some kind of a problem related to respect and regards, they should know that the two brigades were named after Gandhiji and Nehruji. So, I mean, those were the kind of respect Netaji used to give. We also welcome the charge of affairs of Austrian embassy, Mr. Rodhitz. I don't know. I mean, Matthias. It's like it's like my name is equally difficult, so I know it's very difficult to pronounce such names. Anyway, he's a good friend of mine. Dr. Achal Pandya is there, and we would be discussing various aspects in today's symposium. We also have eminent scholar and our dear guide, Professor Pushpesh Pant, here on the panel, who is always very helpful, very supportive, and his words of wisdom would be of immense importance in today's symposium. I also welcome the audience here at the IGNCA. We know that it is because of the social protocols. We are maintaining the social distancing, and that is why a very limited audience has been invited here. But I'm sure that most of you who are watching us virtually would also be happy to listen to this symposium. So I also welcome all the virtual audience who have joined this symposium. Thank you very much.
Now I'll request Mr. Matthias Radostris, chargé d'affaires of Austrian Embassy, to kindly give your address.
Thank you very much. I will have to leave this on. I'm sorry. So thank you very much. It's if it. My name is also difficult for Austrians, so I'm not only for Indians. I'm used to this. Although it is a very typical Austrian name, it still represents its difficulty. So thank you very much, Dr. Sachidanand. We have come across several times, and you're also a very gifted poet, as I found out the last time. Dr. Pandya has always been a very great help to us. And then, of course, very delighted to meet Mrs. Malaka, the grandniece of Netaji. And I want to particularly welcome, of course, our panelists from overseas, Dr. Anita Pfaff. I'm actually very excited, at least to see you virtually. Dr. Pelinka, thank you very much for joining us. And our dear old friend, Dr. Pushpesh Pant, thank you also for joining us and being with us. I won't be long because you're all much more knowledgeable than me, obviously, about Netaji. So what should I say? I just say for us, it's an extremely, when I came here in India, I very quickly learned about Netaji and Netaji's connection to Austria. And those things are always, very important for us as diplomats, because it's some kind of an anchor where we can, dock on, and we can use for all kinds in our bilateral relations, starting conversations or making people interested in Austria, whatever. So naturally, we tend to exploit these things. So we are very happy that today we can do a bit more of this exploitation and focus and have a bit longer conversation on Netaji. And we're very proud to support this because it's a very also an important occasion for India. So what we are trying to do, we will try to focus on his ideologies, on his philosophies, and of course, particularly, that's why we are here, on his relationship to Austria, or to a place that nowadays Austria, which at the time was not really Austria. So what he did there and how this shaped his life and what was important for him. So without much further ado, I would like to let all the knowledgeable people speak, and I will stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for partnering with us, and thank you very much also for making this possible.
Now I will request Dr. Sachidan Joshi ji to kindly invite Dr. Anita Bose to deliver her address.
Thank you, Achal. And we are eagerly waiting, in fact, to listen to Dr. Anita Bose. And most humbly, I would request ma'am to give your speech to all of us. Thank you.
Distinguished members of the panel in Delhi and also online.
To unmute yourself. I think it is mute. You have.
No, I have unmuted myself, unless you have muted me at your end. Distinguished members of the panel in Delhi and also
No, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
I can hear you loud and clear.
I think this.
Pushpesh ji, can you speak something?
Can you hear us?
I can hear Anita.
Hear me now?
No, we can't.
I'm sorry.
Pushpesh,
I'm unmuted.
Just give us a second. We will just test the sound of.
we'll just resolve this issue.
Just give us a second.
Pushpesh ji, can you speak something just to let us know
Yes,
whether there is a problem here
can
or
you
there?
hear me now?
There is no problem.
No.
I can hear her loud and
No.
clear.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes.
Okay, there is a technical snag, of course. So we're just resolving it. We can't hear any of the speakers. Please bear with us.
So I'll keep saying a few things so you can check whether I can be heard yet, because at my end I'm unmuted.
We can hear you on Zoom.
Uh-huh. Sorry.
Perfect, ma'am. You can continue. It's
Yes.
perfect.
So distinguished members of the panel in Delhi and also online, thank you very much for having me in this meeting. I'm very pleased that there is a collaboration between the Ministry of Cultural Affairs and through the Indira Gandhi Centre and the Austrian Embassy, because as you probably can imagine, for me this combination is of particular relevance since my father was Indian and my mother was Austrian. So I'm very grateful to the Austrian Embassy in Delhi to participate in this taking. this is a very meaningful memorial year for me. My father will be 125 years, or would be 125 years old at the end of this ongoing year on 23rd of January next year. And it was also a memorial year for my mother. Just very shortly ago, our family and some friends of my mother celebrated the online event of the 25th anniversary of her death. And so the tie between India and Austria for my father was quite important. As you, some of you may know, my father was imprisoned in Mandalay jail, and his health deteriorated very much. So in 1933, he was released from jail on the condition that he would leave the country, and he would be able to get medical care abroad. And abroad, in this case, was Vienna, Austria, because Vienna was a very well-known medical center at the time. And he went to Europe to follow, first of all, an improvement of his health, but also his ambassadorship, so to say, of India, or the Indian independence movement in Europe. He traveled extensively in 1933 in Europe to make known the efforts of India to attain independence at the time. And in 1934 started writing a book for which he had received a contract from an English publisher, and this was to cover the independence struggle up to that point. The book was called The Indian Struggle. And when he wrote this book, he was looking for secretarial assistance and asked one of the Indian students in Vienna whether he knew of any lady who would be able and willing to work as his secretary. And my mother was just taking an English language conversation course with this Indian student, Mr. Mathur, later Dr. Mathur. And so through Mr. Mathur's introduction, my mother became my father's secretary in 1934. It will be June that this will be the anniversary of that day. My father was in very bad health during that period, and while he was writing the book, partly had to go on to Karlsbad to do so. This is a spa in now Czechoslovakia, or Czechia, sorry, Czech Republic, which was very well known, particularly for problems of gallbladder trouble, which he was suffering of. And he continued traveling between Europe and India for a variety of reasons. For one thing, in India, he would have ended up in jail whenever he came, though at least home internment, which was the case when he returned to India end of 1934. Because his father was on his deathbed. Unfortunately, he did not arrive fast enough to see his father still alive. At that time, traveling by air took 4 days from Europe to India. Austria was another important place for his health improvement, insofar that he also spent a lot of time improving his health, but also writing in the city of Bad Gastein, which is a famous spa in Austria itself. The ties between Austria and India go back a further period, or actually I should say between the German-speaking areas, because there has been an old relationship on the cultural level between India and Germany and Austria for a long time because there was great interest in studies about India in the German-speaking areas. And so when my father came and spent time in, particularly in Austria in the 1930s and later in Germany in the 1940s, there were a number of people who sort of had these old cultural ties to India and that interest. In a way, I must say, of course, I benefited from that tie because probably if he hadn't come to Austria, I and my descendants, my daughter is present today here too, online from South Africa, would not be around. So let me wish our meeting great success, and I hope for some fruitful informations from various sides. Jai Hind, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We are really honored to listen to you on this really august occasion.
Dr. Pandya, I'll just like to interrupt you here, sorry. But we have a surprise over here. And that is, I have the honor to introduce here with the granddaughter of Netaji and daughter of Netaji, Mrs. Mayafaf, also joining us. Welcome, Dr. Mayafaf. Honor to have you. And also grandniece of Dr. Netaji, Mrs. Madhuri Bose is also here. And I welcome you also at the same time. And the best part is that later in the session, we'll discuss about that Dr. Anita Paf, Dr. Maya Paf, and Madhuri Bose, they're writing a biography on Emily Schenkel together. So we'll hear about the book and about the experiences later part. In the meantime, I thought I have to interrupt and introduce and bring this welcome note to everybody's knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monish.
Interrupt two once more because there's one more niece of mine present today, Mrs. Sucharita Basu. She luckily joined us too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Paf.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I will like to request Dr. Anton Pelinka to kindly say a few words on Netaji and about his researches on Netaji.
Yes,
Dr. Anton Pelinka.
Yeah, thank you. First, I just want to underline how pleased I am to be able to participate in this conference. I became interested in the life of Subhas Chandra Bose when I visited India for the first time in 1977. And I met at the Austrian embassy at that time a former soldier of the British Indian Army who became prisoner of war in Germany and was recruited by Bose for this Indian Legion, who participated indirectly, at least, in World War II on the German side. So this was a fascinating story for me. It was not so much, of course, important like the Indian National Army, which had sided with Japan in 1943 and participated significantly in the Japanese war effort to liberate India in 1944. But this was fascinating. And then I started to do research on the life of Subhas Chandra Bose. It was especially important that I was able to find the materials of the Indian National Congress from the 1930s in the archives of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, when the different wings and factions within the Indian National Congress discussed the strategy vis-a-vis the British occupation or colonial power. And of course, as all of you know, Bose became the leader of the Forward Bloc, which was considered the left wing of the Indian National Congress, in conflict, but in a friendly conflict with Nehru and Gandhi, who were the center, the mainstream of the Indian National Congress. And as Anita Pfaff has mentioned, that Bose spent in 1933 and 1934 a lot of time in Vienna and in Austria. The book he started to write there, The Indian Struggle, was also the beginning of an intellectual or political break, not a personal break, with Mahatma Gandhi, because he argued the non-violent strategy of Gandhi will not be successful, and he argued in favor of a rebellion, an armed rebellion against the British force in India. It speaks for the quality of the Indian National Congress of that time, that this criticism did not lead to a break between Gandhi and Nehru on the one side and Bose on the other side. Bose was even elected in 1938 to become president of the Indian National Congress. So the Indian National Congress at that time was very pluralistic. It was a democratic movement permitting different views of strategy, of policies, and able to integrate. And this is, I think, one important message from Bose for India today is the focus on integrating all different facets, all different elements of the Indian society, concerning religion, concerning language, concerning caste. This all attitude is clearly has been expressed by Subhas Chandra Bose, and in that respect, it did not differ from Gandhi and Nehru. As we all know, India today is discussing the ability of the country to integrate again different religions and different languages. This is what we should keep in mind. Bose was a vanguard of underlining there is no Hindu India, there is no Muslim India, there is no Sikh India, there's only India. And this was also expressed in the structure of the Indian National Army when the three leading officers in this army were, one was a Hindu, one was a Muslim, and the third was a Sikh. And by the way, there was also a female fighting regiment in this Indian National Army, also integrating women into the fight for independence. This is a fascinating story. I'm a little bit more doubtful about Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. If he had survived 1945, what would have been his role? We don't have to forget Bose himself was the politician who practiced, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This explains why he sided with Japan and why he tried to win over fascist Italy. In that respect, he succeeded, and Nazi Germany, in that respect, he did not succeed as much as he did succeed in his Japanese orientation. But from the viewpoint of the victors of 1945, the friend of the enemy, the friend of Japan, would have he been allowed to play a really global leading role? Question mark. I'm just making a question mark. Could have he competed with Nehru who became a global leader for independent India? Question mark. This, of course, is a result of his decision to travel in a very complicated and again fascinating way from Kolkata via Kabul, via Moscow to Berlin. I think in that respect, he lost his ability for the future because in 1941, it wasn't clear how the outcome of World War II would be. But at the end of World War II, it was on the side of the losers. And one aspect of his Berlin days was that he participated in a German broadcasting program going to India, which was a propaganda radio for from the German strategic viewpoint to raise resistance against the British rule in India, which is completely understandable. But don't forget, his colleague was the so-called Lord Howe, who did the same with respect to Ireland. And we know how Lord Howe has ended. He was hanged by the British. So we don't know what would have happened if Subhas Chandra Bose would have survived 1945. But we know until the beginning of World War II, until 1939, he had the full potential to become a global leader, like Nehru, who was Gandhi's preferred son, political son, but Bose was also maybe less preferred by Gandhi, the other potential successor of Mahatma Gandhi. So this is just for the beginning, and what it underlines that the Indian struggle was written in India, as Anita Pfaff has already mentioned, was written mostly in Vienna, and it was a breaking point with respect to the relationship between Gandhi and Bose. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anton Pelinka, for such a wonderful talk. Now, I would request Mrs. Renuka Malakar. I would also like to thank her because on a very short to come here, and in spite of her really busy schedule, she came here physically to attend this conference. Ma'am, Renuka ma'am, please.
Anita Mashi, namaste. And Maya, lovely to see you. I've only seen you in photos, and I've heard wonderful things about you from my mother. Of course, Madhuri, lovely to see you, and Professor Anton also. Sir Matthias and Dr. Jain, Munishji and Achal. It is absolutely an honor for me to be a part of this very illustrious panel. I don't even know how I fit into this. All that I know is that in my small way, I like to contribute to keeping the ideology and the contribution of Netaji to the India's freedom struggle, as well as make people aware of the kind of leader that he was, with so much of foresight. Having said all of that, I again want to reiterate, I am not somebody who likes to be on panels, but given an opportunity like this, I didn't want to miss. And in collaboration with IGNCA and the Austrian Embassy's Cultural Forum, and having the charge d'affaires here is something which is it is a step in the right direction, hopefully. And like Anita Auntie said, looking forward to hearing what are going to be the takeaways. So, well, I will just start by saying that other than being a member of the Bose family, having the blood run in my veins, I am actually a product of what history has taught me, and that I grew up learning about what history was in books and what I heard at home from my elders. I also grew up with a conflict of reality and what was in the books. I never knew what was the real, why is the real picture or the real history never written in history books? When I would ask my mother or when I would ask my elders, I would get very, I don't know, I was never satisfied as a child when I got the response of certain questions. And I will give you 3 examples. I used to come back from, say, a trip, and I would see statues of various leaders, and I would never see a statue of Netaji. So I used to ask my mother, where are the statues of Netaji? Why is it not there? And I'm talking when I was probably in class 7, 8, and she would say, how does it matter? Every one of the elders would say, how does it matter? Netaji lives in our heart. But where I had a problem was, as a young child, my next question would be, then let all the statues be removed and let everybody be in the heart, no? How come other statues are there? Are you saying that they are not in the hearts of the people of India? That's why their statue is there? So my mother would anyways, I was called a chatterbox and quite, she would be like, okay, we'll talk about it later. Another example that I would like to give is how this conflict of history and freedom struggle, how it kind of played out in my mind was, I was also aware that Netaji was a foresighted leader. He was ahead of his time. And he was, of course, somebody who brought the real definition of gender equality or women empowerment. So I remember when I was growing up and I went to college and I was like, Mama, we are learning about women empowerment and gender equality. And, I must tell you about it. Like a fool, I thought my mother did not know about gender because I had just learned about gender. So she said, okay, tell me about it. And I said, women empowerment, women have to be in the forefront. Look at this, look at that. So she said, let me tell you about the Rani Jhansi regiment. Let me tell you what women empowerment is. I was so ashamed, not because I didn't know about women empowerment, but because in spite of being from the family of a person who truly embodied women empowerment, truly embodied gender, I didn't even know. I never read it anywhere. I never read it in books. I didn't find it in libraries. I didn't find it in any place of learning. That was my second example. The other conflict which I grew up with was, you don't have to be you don't have to just be an Indian to be a leader. You must have the vision of the world within which India is. And all the other leaders, of course, there was a time in my life when there was this identity crisis in appearance, whether we should wear saris, whether we should wear Western clothes. We had leaders who looked very Indian, and there was this leader who looked only military, only engaged with international leaders. So I was like, what does appearance have to do with a true leader? So there was another conflict that I grew up with. Of course, all of this conflict did, to a certain extent, get addressed because in my heart, and not in the statues, did I see that whatever India was is probably what Netaji envisioned at a certain level. After a while, the vision of Netaji, if he would be probably the prime minister of the country, I believe that India would be a different country altogether, but we won't go into that. But I'll stop here in terms of conflict, which I grew up with reading history books and what I heard from my elders and my relatives. So that's where I came from. The second aspect of what I want to very quickly talk about is there is hope. Not because we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of Netaji, but because of many other things. One, the education policy, for instance, which is now it hasn't been implemented. There's still a lot of discussion happening on that, and Dr. Jain will hear me out on this and also probably align to what I'm saying. The education policy gives you the scope of multilingual, multifaceted aspect. It talks about formative years. It talks about bringing what is culturally relevant into our education system. So I think a child in education, maybe 10 years from now, will know about some parts of history which I didn't learn, which I didn't know, which I needed to know. Because how long and how far are we going to keep on talking about international leaders when we have so many more heroes who are unsung from districts, from rural areas, from different states, interiors of India? There is hope. We will not only be talking about, say, Netaji, but we will be talking about many different aspects of people who contributed in their own way towards the freedom struggle and are contributing towards India's development in the social sector and making a change. And of course, the last thing which I would really hope that people would take forward is, I read during the 125th celebration in Kolkata, which I had attended, I read in the papers on the 20th of January, I think it was, that the famous iconic Howrah Kalka Mail has now been renamed Netaji Express. Great move. But again, the conflict in my mind is, what's in a name? If we were to, and this is a formal proposal that I would use this platform to, is in that train which travels different states, let us have panels which talks about the journey of Netaji. It will be like a moving museum. How many people can come to the Red Fort Museum? How many people can go to Cellular Jail to see a few panels of Netaji's contribution? How many people are educated to read history books? But if you have infographics, if you have panels which are interesting, you can have a children's section, you can have a history section, you can have an international section. Let us put together a team. I will volunteer my time to sit. We will bring graphic illustrators, designers. Let us do this. Let us make the Netaji Express a moving history of Netaji's contribution to the freedom struggle, to what India was, to women empowerment. Let's bring it. Let us glorify what it was and which has just got diminished or buried. Let's make Rani Jhansi Regiment. We have Bharti Sahai ji here with us. I won't take any more time, but but I think it's about time. Like Netaji was action-oriented, let's put our words to action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for really sowing the seeds, for knowing, for taking Netaji to masses. These are really, I think, excellent ideas, and I hope someone in government will pick it up. Thank you. Now I really have a pleasure to invite Professor Pushpesh Pant. Everyone is eager to listen to him. as usual. Sir, kindly, I invite you to speak something on Netaji.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm first of all very honored to be part of this gathering. There are so many members of Netaji's family are there, and Professor Anton Pelinka is there, who had once come to our university way back in '77. And when I was teaching at JNU, our paths did not cross then. But I was so glad to hear that his interest in Netaji started then. Uh, I have a slightly different experience than Malvika ji. She will forgive me for saying this. Probably I'm older. When as I grew up as a child in a small village-like town in Uttarakhand, present-day Uttarakhand, Netaji's presence was very, very palpable. There was in Nainital, where I went to study, there was a Captain Ram Singh, a bandmaster who used to play every evening at the capital grounds, and he would play on popular demand, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम में लुटाए जा. He was then serving in the provincial armed constabulary, but everybody knew that he had been with Netaji and he had put to set to tune the national anthem when he was in Southeast Asia. And there was not only this one isolated episode, there was a relative of ours, one Mr. K.D. Pandey, who had also been a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia, who after his release was running a very plush hotel in Nainital. Very elegant man. He used to put on white gloves before he could touch the steering of his car and so on. But the only thing that mattered in his life was that he had served with Netaji and INA after he had switched sides from a British army to a soldier, an officer in the INA. Then there was where my father used to work in a small lab, and there was a gentleman called Mohan Babu, a lowly clerk, and he used to play a violin in the Ramlila performances once a year. He had a very straight bearing, and he was again, the only thing that mattered in his life was that he had been a soldier in INA. So I'm talking of mid-1950s, where the memory of Netaji was palpable, even distant, remote corners of the country. And I don't think it changed. You had Kish calendar art, you had in each house, from lower middle class to upper middle class, there was an image of a military suited, military attired Netaji. You had postage stamps. And I think every function, patriotic function which ended with Jai Hind, as Anitaji just punctuated her small, absolutely enchanting presentation with Jai Hind. And I think when the sound test was on, she was testing it with Jai Hind. And I think Jai Hind resonates every time from the ramparts of the Red Fort. And it would be a particularly tone-deaf, blind person to imagine that it was not a slogan coined by Netaji. My personal encounters with Netaji did not end here. I was a student of history. And of course, I would agree with Malvika ji that the history is written by victors, which Professor Anton Pelinka also said, that had the war ended, the history would have been written differently. But it is not only a question of the world history, or the history of Indian national movement. The interesting part is that most of us, we tend to forget that Netaji had become a man with superhuman charismatic dimension and a personality even before the INA. I mean, Professor Pelinka said that he had twice been elected to majority to the Congress presidency, and he conducted these camps in the Congress sessions with Alan and Panache. Welcome gates were painted by the great Indian painter Nandalal Bose. So there, and also the kind of language which we use today, Hindustani, that is so much a contribution of Netaji, not only during the INA only, but also because of what he deeply felt, the foundation of the Forward Bloc, the Congress Socialist Party. And it was not always that Nehru and Gandhi were centrist. Gandhi was hardly a centrist, he was right of center. And Nehru was very much at one time a comrade in arms of Netaji Subhas Bose and others in CSP. So without getting into details of that function, I think the key concepts of our polity today, and Professor Pelinka is a scholar of democracy and nationalist movements and so on. So I think what democracy meant in terms of Indian freedom struggle, what it meant in terms of nationalism and internationalism, both things merge in Subhash Bose's personality. And I would repeat, and I think all of us are very grateful of the legacy which is left behind and is continued. I remember my son, I might be an old man with no hair and a white gray beard, and I talk in terms of 50 years back when Netaji was, no, it's not only that. When my son was growing up, he's now 48, 49, But he remembered Netaji from comics and storybooks, not necessarily history textbook. And he would reside in the house in parade with his friends. Subhash ka kehna hai, Delhi chalna hai. So, the memories of the freedom struggle led by Subhash in INA, they could not be airbrushed. You could rewrite textbooks, but you could not erase them from the memory of a grateful people. I would come to another personal experience. I was teaching in Jawaharlal Nehru University. I had just given up my job in Delhi University and joined JNU. And I was a bachelor then. And in Delhi, the bachelors are having great difficulty finding a residential accommodation. I finally found accommodation in Rajendra Nagar. And my landlord was one Mr. K.L. Talwar. And as it turned out, Mr. K.L. Talwar was a younger brother of Bhagat Ram Talwar, the driver who drove Netaji on his great escapade from his Elgin Road house in Calcutta all the way to Kabul and beyond. Now, the interesting part is this, that this family also, the only thing that mattered in their life was, he was himself an announcer in All India Radio, a Pashto announcer, but he would say, all that matters for us is that my brother had something to do with Netaji, and that transformed our life. They were otherwise refugees. But the only thing, they had suffered great tribulations during the partition of India. But again, when I was studying for my PhD, a couple of years my senior was Dr. Kalyan Kumar Ghosh. And Kalyan Kumar Ghosh did his PhD on the formation and work of INA in Southeast Asia. Now, people often talk rather, I think, thoughtlessly of the forgotten hero, the lost army. I do not think that the Indian people are such ungrateful lot that they have forgotten Subhash Bose at all. I know that his statues are less than the other freedom fighters, but I think statues, as Malvika ji herself mentioned, doesn't matter. Subhash lives on in the hearts of the people even today. So even when it is not a hypothetical question, what would have happened ifs and buts of history, had he survived, had he become the prime minister? I don't think he needed to become the prime minister. Even today, when we talk in terms of India living through a critical period, trying to find an idea of India, whether we follow the idea of India blindly, which is supposed to be, to borrow Sunil Khilnani's phrase, the Nehruvian idea of India, or do we go back to India of my dreams of the Gandhi's vision, rural India, pre-modern India, or we go to the vision of India, which is the Hindu Rashtra? All these things are very, very different. And Subhash has so many aspects in his complex personality that you could be emulating what is accused of some people, the idea of fascism. Could he have been a dictator? But then you say that, was Nehru a true democrat, or was he also trying to filter down democracy from top? And Nehru had himself written an article in 36, if I remember, in Modern Review, where he said that he had seeds in him to become a dictator, the arrival of the Chhatrapati, a very famous essay. So I think rather than get worried about what could have been, what did happen, I think what is interesting is that even today we talk in terms of communal harmony, we think of Subhash. We think of gender empowerment, women's empowerment, we effortlessly think of Subhash. I think the great question which we try to avoid is that for long the myth has been perpetrated that India won its freedom only through non-violent freedom struggle peacefully. I think the basic conflict was between the use of force, use of violence, which Bhagat Singh propagated before that, a whole generation of revolutionaries has propagated before that in Bengal. The problem is that Subhash Bose and Gandhi had this basic divergence. What was the difference? How would India modernize? Would it be an accent on material aspects or spiritual aspects? Would it be non-violence or violence? And I think by now there is enough historical evidence to show that there was a transfer of power to India. It was not a revolutionary struggle coming to a conclusion. That is what creates most of the problems for India today. And I think the solution is that if we go back to Subhash, we realize that he was a very, very modern mind, not only a bridge between East and West, Japan and Germany, India and Europe. He also was a person who was talking of a socialist idea, not socialist idea in terms of Marxism, but very much thinking progressively about future. His party was called Forward Bloc. So that mindset, the mindset which is focused on future, the mindset which talks of material progress, not only spiritual progress, but is strongly, deeply rooted in the pluralistic, diverse tradition of Indian culture, and Subhash Bose embodies all that. So I am not at all pessimistic. I know in my experience as an individual, when my granddaughter, who's 14, this morning, he said, "What do you know of Subhash Bose and INA? You are not part of INA at all." I said, "Darling, let me tell you, somebody who was a lieutenant in the army is going to be there, and it is going to be a privilege to see even virtually Netaji's daughter, Netaji's granddaughter, Netaji's grandniece, and also the lady who, my mother was at Shantiniketan, and she often talked about Lakshmi Sehgal. And Lakshmi Sehgal had a distinguished career in India's public life even after that. So I think whatever we do, Subhash is in our flesh and blood, in our memories, and I'm very, very confident that India would visit Subhash again and again. And I'm really very privileged to be part of this distinguished panel this morning, undeservedly so. So thank you very much, Joshi ji. Thank you very much, Matthias sir. And thank you very much, Anita ji, Madhuri ji, Maya ji, and Bharti ji, whom I'm looking forward to listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pan. Now I will request Munish Pal, to kindly introduce Bharti ma'am and her son.
Thank you, Dr. Pandya. Bharti ji we are really fortunate and we are honored to have her presence over here. She's the lieutenant of Rani Jhansi Brigade. And she's one of those fortunate persons who worked and could interact with Netaji. And we are really very fortunate to have her with us so that we could listen to her experience. And also we have with us Mr. Sanjay Chaudhary, who is her son, who would also join help his mother in the what you call the virtual communication with us. So I welcome Bharti ji. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you could enlighten us with some of the moments and the experience you shared with Netaji. आपने म्यूट कर लिया ना हाँ जी
my mother, Sati Sahai, was really a strong person, and she wanted me to join Rani of Rani when Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose arrived from Germany to Tokyo in 1943. She asked Netaji that he used to call him Subhash, because from childhood they know each other. So take my daughter Asha to south and let her fight the enemy. And I also said, yes, I want to go. Netaji said, okay. And then I joined Rani of Jhansi, which was emergency, it was wartime, and it was only 3 months training. And I became sub-lieutenant, then lieutenant, and marched to Burma with other Rani Jhansi regiment. So Netaji, when I saw him first time in Tokyo Imperial Hotel, he just said that, this slim and thin girl, do you think she can fight the enemy? And I was very much agitated. And I told Netaji that I'm an Indian girl and I know how to fight the enemy. He was happy. I liked him when he used to smile a bit. He never thought that, for us, he was our supreme commander. And even today, I regard him as supreme commander. And so And last time when he went away after by the end of the war, I met him. He came to Rani Jhansi, Bangkok, Rani Jhansi Regiment camp, and told our war is not finished. We have to fight again. And you people, you girls also have to join. Though he went away, his voice always echo in our mind that how he asked us to fight and take independence as possible. Last time I met him was also in Bangkok, Rani Jhansi Regiment camp. He said he never used to talk in Bengali. He always used to talk in Hindustani, Hindi. But that day, he just talked to me in Bengali. Like, bhaya korbe na to, means you won't be scared of anything. And again, I was agitated. I said, Ami bhaya kori na, in Bengali. All right, you are Sati's daughter. No, Sati is my mother's name. She was very, very strong, and she won't fear for anything. It was my father who sent my mother to Calcutta to meet Netaji and tell him to come to Japan to lead we wanted a very strong leader, so lead the Indians in Nepal. So, and like that, whenever I saw Netaji, I feel that I must stand straight, his hand, both the hands at side, and he will never like anybody to bow their head. We have bowed enough for 200 years in slavery. Now nobody should bow the head, always straight. This and Netaji, last time I saw him was also in Bangkok. He came to our Rani Jhansi Regiment camp and said, "It is not. This is not the end. We have to fight again and again till when." And he went away, and that was the last I saw him. So even today, I have two sons, and I always teach them how to be brave and fight for our own country, like Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. And so my children also, they're his friends. So many friends come to our house, and I always tell them that India is the only God, first God of our Indians. We believe in God and everything, but we must fight for India for anything, whenever we need. And to think about Netaji, I feel how he was good, he was strong and everything, but his way of talking was so not very like commanding and like that. He was not like Hitler or so. Once I asked Netaji, so Netaji, we used to talk in Hindi only. Netaji, how did you like Hitler? Hitler, I hate him. He said, I hate him. Why? Because when he asked Netaji asked Hitler when in Germany, why you are so popular? Netaji asked, why you are so popular? Then Hitler said, you want to know how I'm popular? Oh, he called a soldier and brought out his pistol and shoot him. And he died, that soldier died. Since then, Netaji never liked Hitler's way. He never liked Hitler. And so he somehow hate him because of his cruel way. And last time, when the war was over and Second World War finished, and before that, our Netaji had to meet an accident and died. But we couldn't believe that Netaji can't. How can Netaji die? But we had to know the fact. Even today, I feel that best leader is Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. This much I can thank you.
Yeah, good she stopped.
Sanjay, would you like to add on something on that? I'm sure you must have been told many other experiences by your mother, which you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I mean,
And
well, since
sorry,
childhood-
Sanjay, I have to introduce you another. Sanjay is also at the same time, he was till last year Secretary General of the Netaji Subhash Trust, and he had been working for this not only because of his mother but his own interest. Sanjay, please kindly take on and enlighten us.
Thank you thank you very much. With a grandfather who worked in Japan for since 1923, and so did my grandmother when she got married and went to Japan, and my mother who later joined the Rani Jhansi Regiment. Obviously, our childhood was, and I must not forget that even her uncle, my grandfather's younger brother, who was the director of intelligence in the INA, of course, who never spoke, unfortunately. We used to try and dig out stories which would have excited us as, young adolescents, but he never let on what all happened at that time. I got to know of some things later on after reading. But yes, right from childhood, as my mother was mentioning, we were instilled with this admiration for Netaji Subhash Bose, the INA, and the whole effort. And it was very strange for me, fortunately or more unfortunately, I was in a boarding house run by Jesuit fathers, and every Saturday we would see these English films where the Americans always won and the Japanese were always losing, and the Axis powers were always losing. And here was I at home being told how brave the Japanese were and what they were fighting against and what they were fighting for. And what ultimately Netaji wanted to achieve, and the fire and spirit he instilled into his soldiers. Our lullaby was mostly Kadam Kadam Badhaya Ja. So that's the kind of songs we learned first before we learned any of the nursery rhymes. So it was quite common for us to, me and my brother, to march to that tune. Always our favorite dress used to be the dress that these people used to wear. But anyway, so that's what we grew up with. It was unfortunate that we learned very little. And after some time, it was, growing up, Renuka was telling us that how we didn't learn anything about Netaji and the great effort. And I would always look for it in the history books. And the history books would have 3 paragraphs on what the INA did and what Netaji did. And almost nothing was there. And over a period of time, we kind of skipped over it and said, okay, he was there. But it is only much later, I think when I
We have lost Sanjay ji. I think his internet is down.
His internet is down.
So
I
maybe
have a question, actually, if I can
yes.
intervene. I'd like to ask Dr. Anita Faf that, ma'am, you were very, very young. You were when Netaji left for Tokyo. And then after his death, you were born, I mean, your mother brought you up, and would like to know exactly as to what what she shared with you, if you would like to tell us, about Netaji and how she explained India, the background to you. And also at the same time, would like to know what was the influence and when did you first come to India? Ma'am, you're not audible, ma'am. Just a minute. Ma'am, I think so mic is mute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Right.
Please do allow me one first remark. I'm so thrilled and privileged to be on the same panel with Asha Di Bharati because it's such an exciting thing to, first of all, be with somebody who really lived through that part of history. And of course, as a woman, I'm also very pleased to be together with her as one person who definitely is an empowered woman, partly also because of what my father saw in the possibilities of Indian women for the future of India. But now let me answer your questions. As you mentioned, I did not know my father personally. I was only 4 weeks old when he saw me last. And of course, I only came to know him through my mother and through my other relatives who talked about him. And my mother, as all my relatives would agree, was a very private person. And if you consider that my mother met my father in 1934, and she said goodbye to him in 1943 in February. That stretch of about 9 years, or not even 9 years, was not even a stretch of time where they had been together all along. But many of those years they didn't see each other at all. Their time to as a period to share was very short indeed. And maybe that is one reason also why my mother was a very private person, and in a way sort of considered her memories of my father also a very personal thing. And so I, of course, got some pictures as a small child, but the image that you get is sort of a totally different one than you would get as a grown-up. And as I was grown up, and also my other relatives from the Bose family, came to meet my mother, we all found that she was not really very forthcoming in sharing things with us. But sometimes when we asked her about something, she would say, "That's none of your business." And that was it. But maybe I would like to express something which is not so much sharing a memory, but conveying an image to me. My mother always told me, said, don't think that you are an important person. Your father was an important person. He was a great man, but that doesn't make you great anything. If at all, it constitutes an obligation for you to try to do something useful and something proper. And I think sort of conveying the need for us others to be humble and show humility, I think was a very important matter, because in some families, I think it's partly the image that is conveyed. Oh, your grandfather, your father, your uncle, whatever, is a great man, so you are something important too. And I think this is something which also shows what she herself was. My sister-in-law, Krishna Bose, who was a very prolific writer, once also wrote an article about 4 important women in Netaji's life. And those were his mother, Bashanta Devi, the wife of C.R. Das, and Vivabati Bose, his sister-in-law, and my mother. And Krishna said, well, I know a lot about my mother-in-law and others, but tell me something about yourself and Netaji. And so she said, oh, I was not an important person in his life at all, which is most likely not true. But I think it maybe shows something also about their relationship, because for him, India came first, second, and third, and then for a long time nothing came in importance, and then maybe something else. So even his family, be it other members of his family or my mother and I, were not really that important to him, because we always had to take a less important place in his life because of this commitment. And I think this is maybe one image that she certainly conveyed. Now let me move to the other aspect of my first visit to India. I was 18 years old, had just finished high school when my relatives in India insisted that I should come and visit the country of my father. My mother was a bit hesitant at the time to let me go. For one thing, she was understandably a mother hen, because I was her only child, and she for her this was very important, and she didn't really readily let go that easily. But the other thing is, she was also worried that since I was still fairly young, that being accorded a VIP treatment when coming to India would sort of go to my head and give me the wrong ideas. And in any case, so she agreed to let me go. She herself did not want to go because she was a very proud person, and she was working to earn her own living, and for the most part my living too. And she did not earn enough to afford a trip to India at that time. Those of you who are old enough know that incomes were low at the time, and international travel was very expensive in comparison to the incomes of the day. So she would not want to go to India being invited by others and others paying for her trip. And since she couldn't afford it herself, she didn't want to go. And when it became possible to afford a trip to India, she had become quite old and convinced that actually she didn't really want to go to India anymore, because the one person she would have wanted to see there wasn't around. For me, India, the trip to India meant a lot because it, of course, made many of the aspects of my father's life more familiar to me, and even sort of everyday things that one learns to absorb during a stay in a country which is not just a country where you go as a tourist, but you go as a in a way to a home country, was very meaningful. At that time, I sort of had planned to go and make my home in India. Life brought different things to me. I met my husband there, and he was Austrian, incidentally, at the time by nationality. And we later on, after getting married, lived in America, and then since many years in Germany. So let me conclude with that. I do not want to take too much of your time recounting my story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question to Dr. Pelinka, please, and probably also to Ms. Puff? I would like to ask Dr. Pelinka to elaborate a bit more on Netaji's relationship, or how he saw Nazi Germany, and in particular Hitler, because we heard, or I think you said he was basically leading the left wing of the Congress, if I understood this correctly. On the other hand, he was somehow seeking support of Nazi Germany for his cause. Now, the question is, how does this go together? Obviously, it's easy to speak in hindsight, and we know everything better afterwards when we are not in this position this person was in at the time. But seeing all the cruelties and everything that happened in Nazi Germany, how was he basically able to cope with this? Or on the other, or indifferently, I mean, he fought against the colonialism, or the colonial regime in India, against the British. On the other hand, I mean, on the other hand, there was this fascist regime in Germany, if you call it like this, whose support he sought. So in a way, excuse me for this provocative question, but I put it in this way on purpose. Would you say that Netaji saw fascism as less problematic than colonialism? Or is this not true? Please, can you elaborate a bit on this? Thanks.
Well, thank you for the questions. First, I think we have to distinguish between Subhas Chandra Bose as an Indian leader and between Subhas Chandra Bose on the world stage. As an Indian leader, he was especially forward-thinking, a modernizer. For instance, the gender question has been already mentioned. In the integrative aspect, integrating all aspects of Indian society. In that respect, he was not very different from Nehru. Nehru and Bose were modernizers, different from Gandhi. Was in that respect an old-fashioned, nostalgic Indian leader. In that respect, of course, Bose had a very important impact on Indian thinking, on the Indian political culture after independence. On the world stage, the picture is different. He sided, looking back, we can easily say, he sided with the wrong allies. He sided with Nazi Germany. He sided with fascist Italy. By the way, fascist Italy differed from Nazi Germany, especially in the respect of racism. Fascist Italy was very much interested to push forward the idea of Indian independence. Nazi Germany was not interested at all. Hitler even offered Molotov in 1940, the Soviet Union should take India as a zone of interest, as a periphery of Soviet influence. So Nazi Germany was racist. And Bose knew this, enough sources underlining that Bose knew about the racist attitude of Nazi Germany with respect to all non-European countries and peoples. Nazi Germany had no idea, no interest to propose Indian independence differently from Japan, differently from Italy. He tried to play a role in world politics, but understandably, he sided with the losers of World War II. He was not a Nazi in the sense of racism, of anti-Semitism. He was, and there is an interesting quotation when Stafford Cripps, this Labour politician, member of Churchill's national government after 1940, was asked, is Subhas Chandra Bose a fascist? Cripps said, no, he is all for Subhas Chandra Bose, meaning he was a nationalist. He was an Indian nationalist, putting India's interest as number one. As Anita Puffer said, India, India, India. And this concept of putting India first can be explained why he made this, in my viewpoint, decisive failure going in 1941 to Berlin, siding with the wrong allies, despite being not a Nazi, not a fascist. And before, when Japan started the war against China in 1937, the Indian National Congress criticized Japan distinctively, siding with the Chinese government, the Kuomintang government. Bose also said Japan is an imperialist power. But after 1941, when Japan started a war against the United States and Britain and the Netherlands, the perspective changed completely. In that respect, you can call him, on the global stage, willing to side with everyone who was fighting the British. India first for Bose meant siding with any global actor who was fighting the British colonial power. And this, of course, explains why in 1945 he died on the wrong side of world history. Nevertheless, as an Indian leader, the modernizer, the sensible Indian who pushed forward the gender aspect, who underlined the unity over diversity, who was against the Muslim League, who was favoring all kinds of Indians, indifferently from language and from religion. In that respect, he has been a remarkable person. So again, and this is my last sentence, we should distinguish between Subhas Chandra Bose as an Indian leader. In that respect, he has been extremely important and has a permanent impact on India, and as a world leader who, for understandable reasons, was not successful. He sided with the wrong partners because he saw Britain as the arch enemy And that's this why he ended as an ally of the Japanese conquerors who had conquered half of China and whole Southeast Asia, and not liberating them, but replacing European colonial powers with a Japanese empire. Thank you.
If I may add something to this, of course, Professor Pelinka knows much more about these topics, even though we were fellow students a long, long time ago. He has sort of specialized in this as a scholar much more than I did. But let me add one thing. My father was, ideologically speaking, was definitely a leftist, and you might say socialist. He was not a communist because he never joined with the Communist Party in India, and that I think is also of some significance. But given a choice, he would have preferred to side with the Soviet Union and not with Germany. In fact, when he escaped from India to seek foreign help for the independence movement, he went to Kabul and he tried to get in touch with the Soviet embassy. But the Soviet embassy had, and the Soviet state as such, had not been very forthcoming in supporting the independence movement either. And of course, shortly later, the attack of Germany on the Soviet Union led to the fact that the Soviet Union also sided with the Allied powers quite officially. So I would maybe add to what Professor Pelinka said. He sided possibly with the wrong people, but or the wrong nations, but he sided with the only nations that were available, because there was certainly no other nation that would have been willing to support India in the independence movement because of a number of reasons. I don't want to go into all that now. This is a complicated relationship on the world scene. But his preoccupation with India's independence, I think, didn't give him another choice but to do that, unless he had sort of negated any foreign support at all. But he certainly was a leftist, and I think I agree with Professor Pelinka that as far as the political orientation was concerned, his position was similar to Nehru's position. In fact, he was very disappointed that in disagreements with Gandhi, Nehru did not support him more outspokenly, even though they had very similar ideas, secularism and my father also at one stage stated there are two totally underutilized resources India has. One is the downtrodden class and the others is women, and partly, of course, the overlap. Thank you.
May I add briefly a short answer? First, I think we are in full agreement that from beginning with 1941, Bose did not have any choice anymore. But he had a choice before 1941. Staying in India, like Nehru, accepting internment by the British, siding with the Leave India campaign, with the leadership of Congress. This was the other option. But as soon as he had opted in 1941 to go to Kabul, and by the way, the only embassy who backed him was the Italian embassy. He traveled with an Italian diplomatic passport via the Soviet Union to Nazi Germany, just some months before Germany attacked the Soviet Union. So it was, I agree, beginning with 1941, he has burned the ships behind him. But before 1941, he had an option to stay in India, to fight in a different way for Indian independence, a way which was in a certain way less heroic but a way which succeeded. In 1947, and Nehru became the first prime minister, and maybe if Bose had stayed, Bose would have become the first or the second prime minister of India. So until 1941, he had a second option.
Thank you, Dr. Pelinka. Before we listen to Dr. Maya Fav and Madhuri Boseji, I've been told that Professor Pant, who is a former colleague of Dr. Pelinka, has a question for him. May I invite Professor Pant? Can you listen to me, Professor Pant?
I can.
Hello, Professor Pant, can you listen?
I can listen to you. What's the question?
Now, you wanted to ask Dr. Pelinka something?
Yes, I just wanted to ask Dr. Pelinka one thing, that aren't we very narrowly focusing on this issue of Subhash Bose backing the wrong powers or having a limited choice of alliances by focusing on the years exactly when he went to Germany looking for aid, or went to Japan forming INA in Southeast Asia? Because we go back a little earlier. It was even Gandhi who had gone and visited on his way back from the Round Table Conference in Mussolini's Italy. Nehru had also been given a conducted tour by his, at that stage, mentor Krishna Menon to visit certain, the Spanish Civil War and so on. Nehru had also gone and tried to have a look at Soviet Union in the late 20s. So all this period between after the First World War and the outbreak of the Second World War was a period where various Indian leaders were trying to cultivate alliances, including the Soviet-sponsored Brussels League Against Imperialism Conference, and various accounts are available of this, that they were trying to establish contact with other freedom fighters in other countries and so on. I have a problem with the formulation that Subhash Bose was backing the wrong horse, was choosing the losing party. Who knew before the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union that the Soviets would go to the Allied side? Who knew before the Pearl Harbor had taken place that the Japanese would lose? The Japanese were advancing, Rommel was advancing, the pincer movements, and as long as the war was in the favor of the Germans, it was not a question of choosing a wrong side or a losing side. Nobody knew which side would lose. Would have anybody imagined the discovery of an atom bomb and Japan's surrender, or Japan having mishaps in Southeast Asia even before that? So I think the problem of saying that Subhash Bose did not succeed on the global stage is a bit unfair to Subhash Bose. I, as an Indian, feel that he built up his diplomatic alliances not only because he had no options, but others were also trying to cultivate at the same time various European powers. So that's one part. The second part is, why do we divide his personality into the global leader a failure, the Indian leader a great success with a legacy coming on? I recall letters written by Subhash Bose and collected and available in print in the collection of bunch of old letters by Jawaharlal Nehru, where Jawaharlal Nehru writes that you call me, he's addressing Subhash Bose, as a champion of lost causes. So before the outbreak of the World War, the champion of lost causes was not Subhash, but Subhash was telling Nehru about that. Now, the one last thing, which I think is of substantial importance, it is not a question of what Subhash should have done and stayed back in India and so on. We are overlooking that the formation of the 1935 Governments of India Act and governments formed in states in which Congress and Muslim League participated. There was no change of power in the center, but in states, there was a diarchy there. And maybe Subhash, in his wisdom, rightly thought that staying in India was not only imprisonment by the British or house arrest, it was also being party to a power sharing carrot which the British had dangled before. And Gandhi himself was very unhappy the way the Congress governments took over their task in the states at all. And also, nobody could have then in 35 imagined that there would be something called a Quit India movement. So, and which was practically a short spell of anarchy. And by the time India attained its independence, and I think there is enough documented historical material on this from the archives in Britain and America, that everybody was jockeying for post-war power, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt. who was supposed to be sympathetic for Dr. Ramani's book exposes the myth of Roosevelt's sympathy for Indian freedom movement. And I think it was again predicated by what the American war interests were. By the time the India became independent, there was a beginning of a Cold War, this one. And the second part, to my mind, I think is more important, is that the partition was looming very large. The British had succeeded somehow or other in dividing the Indian freedom movement along communal lines. And there, on one hand, there was Jinnah, and on the other hand, were there Muslim leaders in Congress party who did not want partition like Maulana Azad, but they had been in prison ever since 42 till the eve of independence. And there was basically a very confused situation. So people, not that he had no option, but he probably in his wisdom and foresight took steps which, with the advantage of hindsight, we can pass a judgment, but I think it's not quite fair.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, have no intention to be unfair. And we have also to keep in mind that when Bose left British India at the beginning of 1941, the situation was very different from the situation at the end of 1941. In 1941, Britain was alone. And Germany was indirectly almost allied with the Soviet Union. The United States still out of the war. At the end of 1941, Germany was fighting everyone, including the United States. So in 1941, there was some realism in the expectation that Germany, indirectly backed by the Soviet Union, at least economically, allied with Italy, friendly with Japan, could win. But at the end of 1941, this was over, this option. Of course, so it's understandable that he tried to side without being a Nazi himself, to side with Nazi Germany as an ally fighting the British. Because at the beginning of 1941, there was some realistic argument that Britain will lose the war, standing alone. At the end of 1941, Britain had allies in the Soviet Union and the United States of America. And this, of course, is in a certain way the tragic and Subhas Chandra Bose visit of the global stage of world politics.
Thank you, Dr. Pelinka, for that. Soon we are going to come to end to the session. We would like to request all our guests, those who are on who are virtually connected to us, to kindly send us questions, whom would they like to address, so that we can, towards the end, call them. Because there's some technical slack, so we'd like to give them enough time. Now I'd like to come over to Dr. Maya Faf and Madhuri Bose-ji, and of course, Anita Bose-ji, to kindly enlighten us about the book which they are working on, that is the biography of Emily Schenkel. And I have a personal question, Dr. Maya Faf, is who selected your name, first name? Because that was one of the choice which was put in front of your mother also, for your mother's name. So maybe you can share that with us. Thank you.
Good day, everybody from Cape Town. It is really an honor to be here, as much as it's strange to look at all these squares on my screen instead of real people. I would suggest that my cousin Madhuri Didi would take the lead on introducing the book, if you may. And I will just add something towards the end, because that's almost how our roles are in writing the book. She really conceptualized the bigger picture of it, and it's really coming along very nicely. So would you be willing to do this, Madhuri Didi?
Yes, of course. Am I unmuted? Well, first to say Jai Hind from London. I get a special pleasure to say Jai Hind from London, which was, of course, the heart of the erstwhile British Empire. So, and I want to send a special warm greetings to my Asha Pishi. I'm not sure, I can't see her on the screen, but I hope she is there. And thank you for your very special presentation. And I know that you have many more stories to tell about Netaji, and we look forward to the publication of your book. So now about the book we are writing on Emilie, my great aunt, Anita's mother, and Maya's grandmother. I wouldn't like to reveal too much about the book, but as we all know, that there are many, many books about my great uncle Netaji, but almost none, really, no biography on the wife of Netaji, Emilie Schenkel. So the three of us decided a while ago that we do need to write about the woman who was Netaji's partner and his confidant in many ways during a very critical phase of his life. So we decided to do this biography. We are hoping to launch it in the 125th birth anniversary of Netaji. I hope our publisher will be as quick as we are trying to be in drafting the book. And we hope that in the course of next year, we shall be able to release the book. Now, just a little bit of history of my connection with my great aunt, Emilie, though we all called her auntie. She became the universal auntie because she didn't want to be called great aunt because she, as she said, it made her feel old. So I was very fortunate to live with her in a home in Vienna on Bastiengasse from the late 70s till the early 80s. So I saw her from very close. And for me, she was a woman of courage, integrity, and independence. And what my aunt Anita has already emphasized, and what I found remarkable, she never wanted to bask in reflected glory. And that was also one of the reasons she told me she didn't want to go to India because she knew what would happen. So she was a very private person. She didn't want to take any credit of any kind. And I think we owe it to her memory that we write a book about her as a woman, as a person who came so very close to Netaji, and also who has left us with a very great legacy. So I think it will be our tribute to our auntie, and I think I would leave it at that and let my aunt Anita and my cousin Maya talk a bit about her in terms of how they saw her. Thank you.
Mommy, you are muted.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Didi, for introducing the book so nicely, or the concept of it. So yeah, for me, I mean, I now live in South Africa, in a country that in many ways has similarities with India. You know, I listen to Indian history sometimes as audiobooks these days, and I feel it's a one-to-one comparison. It's just the timeline is shifted. And a lot of the problems I see here on a daily basis, you know, gender-based violence, the rich and the poor, and the divide getting bigger and bigger with all these crises we are hitting on a daily basis, Corona just being one of them, it really makes me think about what is my place in this whole thing. So the person who really started making the connection between the East and the West, which is now embodied in my mother and obviously in all of the rest of the generations following her, was my grandmother. And she was incredibly brave to do this. And we often hear the question, you know, what did Netaji find in Emilia? He had so many options. Why would he choose this person in Vienna? So, you know, from my perspective, I asked myself, you know, and I never had the privilege to meet Netaji, but I knew my grandmother very well. I asked myself, what did she, a really empowered woman, find in him? You know, there must be someone really to knock you off your feet to consider a relationship in 1934, 35, 36 with a person from a different country. As the Nazis were knocking on the door of Austria, and then pursuing that relationship, you know, that's really a brave move. So, yeah, unfortunately, as my mother mentioned, she would not share readily from her interactions with her soulmate. She would say, that's none of your business, das geht dich nichts an, when we'd ask her, and we would try. You know, so I had to kind of dig a bit deeper, and this is really an opportunity. This book is an opportunity to dig deeper in a lot in my mother's memory, which is remarkable. And I'd also like to say, in terms of the legacy, my grandmother was not a politician. She was, in many ways, quite a normal Viennese person. Well, I can't say ordinary, because her character was not ordinary, but she was, you know, of middle class values and behaviors and way of life. She certainly didn't want us to think that we're anything else but ordinary people. But she touched us deeply with just being this very empowered, original, authentic person. And when I look at my mother, I mean, she's a remarkable person, sitting there, may I give away your age, mommy? Maybe I don't have to, but you know, just what my mother has achieved in her life is remarkable. And I mean, maybe in my case, it's more that to have the choice to live a free life as a woman is also remarkable. And I'm grateful to my grandmother, my mother, to be such great examples for that. And we also have another generation of females. I have a niece called Pia, another Indian name, and we might come to the name soon, who is also an empowered woman. So I see, and as that, I will hope that our book will be an inspiration to many women who, you know, will see, okay, I mean, sometimes you just have to say no, or you have to be assertive, or you have to resist. And there was a lot of resistance of my grandmother in many ways against the patriarchal system. And I think it's much needed, and I think the world is ready for it. And there's a lot to be done, especially in India, to reach gender equality. So I really hope that the inspiration that I was privileged to get through those generations of empowered women leading up to, you know, really free choices, and my life being run by myself and not by some man, it would be also, you know, be a seed dropped on fertile ground in the life of many other women. I truly hope that. And yeah, being in the presence of really, really remarkable women, like we've heard speaking today, gives me encouragement that it will filter through. Eventually, we'll get there. So that's what I'd like to say. And regarding my name, I'm aware it means illusion. I tried to get to the bottom of the concept of Maya. I'm still not quite there. I don't think it's an easy concept to grasp. I would probably leave it to my mother to answer the question why you named me Maya. I'm quite grateful because in Europe, the association with Maya is that of a bee. It's a cartoon character of a bee, Maya the bee. And she is a very adventurous creature, and I love honey. So I think that part suits me, but I'm sure this is not why you called me Maya, Mommy. You can respond to that, please.
Well, with regard to names, somewhat not quite seriously, I have to refer to what my husband sometimes said. Our first child was called Peter Arun. All our children have Eastern and a Western name. And so my husband sometimes says, well, that shows the change in our outlook to life. Peter is the rock on which the church, the Christian church, was to be built. So we still had this sort of very firm idea. Our second son is Thomas Krishna, and Krishna was the apostle of Jesus who doubted. And Maya is, of course, a further step in something less concrete, maybe. But I must also say she was not named for the bee, because there was a children's book which was quite popular when I was a child, but which had come totally out of fashion by the time my daughter Maya was born. But we liked the name that it signified it. And this, in her case, of course, the first name was more the Indian than the European one, even though you have the name Maya as a sort of variant of Maria in Spanish language also. So that was the story of the names. But let me just add one more aspect to our book. My mother referred to Madhuri as her second daughter. And Madhuri, many years ago, shortly after my mother passed away, said, I want to write a book about Auntie. You have to help me, or you write it with me. And this is how the original idea of the book started almost 25 years ago. But we were both professional women, so we had other things to do in between. And then my daughter Maya became a professional woman in her own right, and she joined the pair of us in writing this book. And I think she probably will sort of take the lead in conveying something of a legacy and a message, because maybe she realized it more what the legacy of the grandmother was. Than for us, Madhuri and myself, who sort of experienced her in a slightly different way. But we certainly hope that this book will not only be the biography, but sort of also contribute to the sort of a feminist approach to that as an inducement for other women to lead an empowered life. Because I wish to add one thing from the Austrian and German aspect. I don't know whether the Austrians present in this meeting will agree, but if you look at society and the position of women compared to other parts of Europe, for example, to Scandinavia, Austria and Germany are very traditional societies in a way, as far as the gender relationship is concerned and the family policy and family law is concerned. more like Mediterranean countries in many ways. And so I think there is a lot of scope yet in all parts of the world, first of all, to struggle for equality, and equality in a very extensive way, not only in a gender question, but even if we look at international developments now, there are other aspects of emancipation which we, I think, learn that have not been achieved to the degree that we thought it was, and racism is, if that term is correct at all, is one of them. So we hope that we will induce some women and also some men to look at society in a different way and induce them to think in a more constructive way, maybe than the tradition very often was. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pfaff. We all are looking forward to the release or launch of this book. In the meantime, we are coming close to the closing of. We have Mr. Andreas, who is virtually joined us. He has a question for Professor Anton Balinka. May I request Mr. Andreas to kindly put forward his question, but before that, if he could kindly introduce himself, please. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to introduce myself, I was an Austrian diplomat and I worked for the European Commission. I'm half British, half Austrian. I remember Professor Pelinka from my times as a student at the university in Innsbruck in the 1970s, when we were a bit younger. And I lived in India for a while when my wife was the Finnish ambassador to India. Professor Pelinka, the question also goes to the family members, maybe. Professor Pelinka said that Mr. Bose had a choice until 1941 and then took his decisions more or less alternativlos. But I recall that I think Gandhi and others said that for as long as the Second World War was ongoing, they would hold back on their independent struggle against the British because they saw that British were on the side of democracy against fascism. And so my question is, what do you think triggered Mr. Bose to take a different line, whereas other Indian leaders had deliberately decided to hold back as long as the British were fighting a war? And we also recall that a large number of Indian British Army troops fought in the Second World War against in Europe, as well as against the Japanese, like a British uncle of mine who was in the British Indian Army in Burma. So what made his choice as opposed to the deliberate choice taken by Gandhi?
Well, I think one answer is an hypothesis. Nehru did not have Emilia Schenkel waiting for him in Europe. I don't know how important this aspect was, but in 1941, Bose was married to a woman living in Europe. This was not the fact with any of the other leaders of the Indian National Congress. This may be significant. I don't know. I don't know about the private documents and papers which could explain maybe this aspect. The other aspect was when Bose last internal struggle with Nehru about the leadership in the Indian National Congress, there was in a certain way not anyway an obstructionism. So Bose still considered himself being part of the Indian National Congress, but he perceived himself being an outsider within Congress. So there are two factors. And thirdly, maybe we don't have to forget before Bose became president of the INC in 1938, he visited Britain. and he talked with the leadership of the Labour Party. The Labour Party was always more or less in degrees friendly concerning India's independence. So he had contacts with the Labour Party, which backed from the very beginning Britain in the war, and Stafford Cripps from the Labour Party came to India in the Cripps mission 1942. Just to put it short, I don't know exactly. I have some reason to believe that feeling himself an outsider within Congress and having a wife for him waiting in Europe at that time could have played a decisive role. Thank you.
May I add something to this? I doubt that having a wife mattered very much in this. Not that I want to agree with my mother that she was an unimportant person, but in a sort of maybe black and white, simple-minded categorization, I would say one thing. For my father, compromising with the British was out of the question. He wanted to fight for India's independence and use the situation of the war where Britain was in a weaker position to further this cause. If I would look at Mahatma Gandhi's position in a simple-minded way, I would say he was an uncompromising disciple of nonviolence. And in the process, maybe supporting the British against a very aggressive power, Germany, and or two powers, Japan, was an acceptable thing for him. And that's why he chose this compromise. My father would never have compromised with the British, and who was right and who was wrong is hard to say. Eventually, India became independent, but in a way that neither Gandhi nor my father approved of, that is partitioned India. And we saw, of course, that the wars between Pakistan and India were not a very conducive and positive development for the subcontinent as such. But I think the lines of different positions sort of are not that clear and one-sided and one-dimensional as one might think. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. With that, we come to the conclusion of the session, which was very informative. But before that, I'll rather request Mr. Matthias Radostich to kindly deliver a vote of thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And apologies to all those who still had a question, etc. But our time is limited and we just have to draw to a close somewhere, and that is here. But if there is a demand, I'm sure we can organize another session on the same topic, and we'll deal with everything there that we haven't dealt with today. So mine is just to thank all of those who have contributed to making this a success. Dr. Sachidanand, with a difficult name, thank you very much. Dr. Pandya, thank you very much. As usual, a good friend of the embassy, and thank you for your support. Dr. Pushpesh, all the via the Zoom meeting. And in particular also, of course, our overseas guests who joined us from London, Cape Town. I myself spent 4 years in South Africa, so I'm very attached to Cape Town. And of course, Germany and Austria. Also vielen Dank an die österreichischen, deutschen Teilnehmer. Und ja, also ich hoffe, wir können das einmal wiederholen. So thank you very much. And with these few words, we unfortunately have to close the session, but we'll be back in one way or the other. Thank you.
In fact, we here normally we say last, not the least, but I would really like to thank the media center of the IGNCA, who have really painstakingly done many rehearsals to make this virtual as well as physical conference a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Invite those who are physically present for a cup of tea outside this room, please.